Hey, I'm Vlad with GlobMarble, and today we're going to be making another concrete sink. I've already done this before, but the first time the edge was made completely square. I want to do something different this time, so I'm going to use our countertop edge forms to give it a nice profiled look. And the next difference from last video is instead of using a mold that I bought, I'm going to make my own out of some high density foam. I'm going to glue a couple of pieces together and sculpt them into my own shape. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this to size, and I'm cutting it with 1 inch extra space just to make sure that I have enough to play with and I could afford to make a few mistakes. And now the sink is going to be cut out of these two pieces. I want it to be 4 inches deep, so I'm going to have to find a way to adhere both of these pieces together. I tried out a lot of different glues and some sample pieces, and with this high density foam, it's sensitive to some types of adhesive. Super glue melts it, the epoxy adhesives or the fast set adhesives that you get also melt it, but one thing that I found that doesn't melt it is just regular wood glue. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a thin layer of wood glue between these two and come back tomorrow morning. So now what I'm gonna do is take a piece of wood, put some weights. That makes sure that it's gonna cure all pressed nice and flat against each other, and there's not gonna be any delamination between those two pieces. I'll see you guys in 24 hours. So before I start cutting the sink insert, I want to get a better look at what I'm working here with visually. So I want to attach the countertop edge form first. I'm only going to need to put it on 3 sides. This back side, I'm assuming, would be put up against a wall, so it's just going to be flat. I'm planning on detailing these 2 walls and this one. That means I'm going to have to find a way to fit them seamlessly into the corners. As an example of what I'm trying to say is I get this one in the corner, this one in the corner. What's going on? We got to make a 45-degree angled cut over here, and then they're going to fit. What's going to help me make those cuts is this miter box. You see right here is that 45-degree angle. I put it up against the thing. I'm going to clamp it down so it doesn't move anywhere, and then with a blade go and start cutting it. Now that we have our edge forms cut nicely, they all fit very nicely. Now the question is, how do we attach them to make sure they don't keep moving around? And the answer is double-sided tape. But before I start putting the double-sided tape on, I'm going to use a little bit of denatured alcohol to wipe down the edges of the form walls and also the back of the molds, just to make sure that it's completely oil-free and that it sticks really well. So now it's time to go ahead, take off the protective red layer, and then glue them on. And now finally, the last thing we got to do to these countertop edge forms is address the seam, and the fix is really easy. All I'm going to do is take some silicone caulk, place that caulking in between, and then I'm going to patch it over with a regular box cutting blade. Then I'm just going to remove that excess caulk once it dries. So it's the next day, and now we're ready to start cutting this. So I'm gonna go ahead, use this box cutter, and I made sure that this is a fresh blade. Made sure it's as sharp as possible, because if it's not, it's gonna be more difficult to cut it. There's gonna be a lot of imperfections. I'm gonna get those imperfections anyways, you're gonna see, but this is gonna reduce the amount of them. See, just like that. All this stuff comes from a cut that isn't as precise as it should be. If you're just pushing, then you're gonna get that, but you also need to slice. So this isn't that big of a deal because I'm gonna cut it off anyways, but see the difference? All right, now it's time to see whether what I cut is the size that I like. It's gonna sit over here. Here's the base of the faucet I'm gonna be using. It sits right here, and yeah, this looks like the size that I want. Now we have to address something else. We have to address these imperfections. I'm just gonna go ahead and patch up all of these things with plaster of Paris. All right, so now it's time to mix up our plaster of Paris. I'm not gonna mix a lot at once because this stuff will start to harden on me, and all this stuff in the cup is gonna be useless. So I'm just gonna be mixing a little amount at a time. I want it to be at like sort of a peanut butter consistency. Then come back with the blade and take off the excess. And lastly, I'm going to go ahead and hit some of these imperfections with some 400 grit sandpaper. And the next step is going to be our overflow system with these gadgets. If you've ever seen a porcelain sink, you're going to notice that they have a small hole on the side. That's what the overflow system is. The system is optional. It takes a little bit more time than just placing a knockout right here, pouring your concrete, and then taking this out. That's another option that you could do. But I like doing the overflow system because it allows a larger amount of water to drain quickly, and you're not going to hear any gurgling or bubbling as the water is draining. Not all sinks without an overflow system do this, but a lot of them do. So what the whole system consists of is the insert mechanism, the poly cap and the poly dome, the overflow tube, and the tube insert. So first I got to drill a hole for the tube insert, make sure it sticks out just enough for the tube and the hole to connect, and then the tube would bend into the poly cap. The tube is adjustable, you can cut it wherever you need to save a lot of space. Usually these sink molds are made out of plastic and they're hollow on the inside, so how you'd install the poly cap and poly dome is you stick it to the top and then you attach it with a bolt from the inside, but I can't do that because I got a solid piece of foam right here. I have a solution, but first let's get the tube insert out of the way. First I'm going to measure where about the middle is. Drill our first hole. You know what? Drilling this foam is a little bit more difficult than I anticipated. And now let's get to the poly cap issue. We're gonna see where about the middle of the mold is, about right there. So the plan is I'm gonna drill a hole in the center, fill it with epoxy, stick that in there with the screw exposed, and then tomorrow morning it's gonna be secure. On second thought, I don't want to do that just yet. I want to get the silicone to the mold so that tomorrow everything is secure and I'm ready to start casting my concrete. So I'm going to lay this out to approximately how far I want it to be. Draw a line over where the border of the sink is. And now I want to start applying my paste wax everywhere that the mold isn't going to be. The paste wax is a release agent that makes sure that my concrete is going to demold from the form. I need it everywhere that the concrete's going to be touching. And it usually comes with a sponge, but I lost mine, so using a paper towel basically does the same exact thing. And then lastly, we want to put the paste wax all over our mold. Now the foam is kind of porous, and especially in addition with the plaster of Paris, so I'm gonna use a little bit more than I would on the melamine board, but that's fine. And now it's time to put the silicone on the bottom. I'm gonna get it initially glued on with a wiggly stripe down the middle. And then I'm gonna go ahead and hit the edges to make sure that we have a clean kind of transition and there's no gaps in the concrete that we're gonna have to break off later. And if I'm honest, I don't like the amount of silicone that's coming out from under there. I'm gonna take it off and put a little bit more so that some gets squeezed out over the edges. Much better, this is what I wanted. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this fondant tool and hit the edges with the fondant tool. What that's gonna do is it's gonna create a rounded edge over the counter. And since we put all that release agent, all that paste wax, we're gonna be able to take it off of the, take the excess off and keep that rounded edge there. And now we can do the same exact thing for the faucet knockout, but we don't have to use the fondant tool because the faucet knockout is obviously going to be covered by the faucet cover. So let's go ahead and drill that hole. I'm going to go ahead and use this old expired tar bender. It's expired because it turned yellow, but it's not going to have any difference in how strong or structural it is. So this is actually the perfect job for it. 2 parts A to 1 part B. Let's mix it and pour it into the hole. So tomorrow this is all going to set up and we're going to be ready to cast our concrete. And we're back the next day. Let's start to remove the excess. I should have put a little bit more paste wax on here. So I'm going to go ahead and just scrape this off and then reapply some paste wax as soon as I'm done. I'm gonna go ahead, add a little bit of painter's tape to the poly cap, just to make sure that no concrete gets inside of it. I'm gonna attach the overflow tube, and I'm not gonna cut it yet. I wanna get an even spray all across the surface that's behind it, and if it's skin tight like that, that's gonna be a little bit harder. So we're gonna get onto that after we do the first layer of our spray coat. So what we're gonna need today is the face mix, the backer mix, and the modifiers. The modifier is the water mix that you're gonna be using to mix in here, 1 gallon of this per 50-pound bag. The reason you use this instead of water is because the backer in the face mix has extremely high PSI. It's meant for countertops, it's meant for stuff that's gonna be sat on, it's gonna be used, scratched. So I think this goes up to 10,000 PSI, and the modifier has a bunch of additives inside of it that's gonna help you out. I'm only gonna mix a quarter of the bag of the face mix. I don't think I'm gonna need any more, and I think I'm gonna use up a total of the entire bag of the backer mix. Both of these bags come with either a white option or a gray, concrete gray option. I'm gonna be using the white one, but I'm not gonna be adding any color packs. With the white, you could. There's a whole lot of different colors you can achieve, but I wanna go for the white, and then I'm gonna stain it later. You're definitely going to need a concrete mixer for the backer mix. You're not going to be able to mix this by hand. And then with the hopper gun, I'm going to set the nozzle size to a little bit larger than a 1/4 inch. 1/4 inch is the minimum. You could get away with making it a little bit larger though. For a quarter bag of the face mix, I'm going to need about 36 ounces of the modifier. It's basically this cup to the top. Before I pour and measure it, I'm going to go and shake it up, make sure that all those ingredients inside of there are mixed and thoroughly incorporated throughout the whole mix. And 12.5 pounds of the face mix. And so how the hopper gun works is it's connected to a compressor. You turn this switch and air starts flowing out. The trigger opens up the stopper inside of the funnel that lets the material flow inside of there and shoot out of the nozzle. Usually you don't have to pull the lever all the way. The air pressure is too much, so you kind of regulate it. You have a feel for it. I'm probably gonna put it at Now it's time to mix our face mix. I like putting the water at the bottom of the bucket. It makes everything a lot easier. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add about half of the mix first, mix that in, and then while I'm mixing, somebody else is gonna slowly introduce it. That way everything is completely incorporated and mixed well. This is way too little water, so I'm gonna add a little bit more water in there because I want the mix to be almost like a milkshake consistency, and this is definitely not it. This is approximately the consistency that I want, so I'm gonna go ahead, scrape the sides of the bucket to make sure that all of that unmixed material gets taken off of the bucket, gets incorporated into the wet mix. I'm gonna add a tiny bit more water just for good measure and mix it all thoroughly again. I'm gonna go ahead and pour that mix inside. Not gonna fill it to the top just yet. And then I'm gonna go ahead and spray it onto this cardboard just to make sure I have the right level of airflow that I want from this nozzle. That's good. I started noticing that the mix isn't coming out too well. I thought that I needed to add a little bit more water, but it turns out that we got a backup compressor running right now because the big one failed. So we just have to wait a little bit for that air pressure to rise up again inside of the compressor to make sure that we get a good spray. Let's see if it works now. Now I'm gonna take a brush, and especially in those corners, wow, this is a really thick coating I put on here. It doesn't have to be this thick, but especially in the corners, you wanna kinda get it worked in there to make sure that all the mixed in material, all the dry material gets incorporated and mixed in with the wet material. And especially up here, because this is an edge form, I might not have hit it as much as I would like to on the very top. So I'm going to make sure that everything is completely perfect. Now this is starting to cure up. I gotta go run ahead and wash out the hopper gun. This is exactly how you do it. We're gonna go ahead, fill the hopper gun up with water while washing the wall. Turn the hopper gun on and wash out the entire contraption. Nothing's getting left on my hand. That means it's clean. And now it's time to address our overflow system. Let's take off that painter's tape, bend it to approximately where I think it's going to be cut. You should always start off cutting less than you need to just to get a figure ballpark about where you want to cut it, because you could always cut off more later, but if you cut off too much, there's nothing you can do. I'll cut right here. That's still too much. I think I could cut off one more notch. I think I could get away with cutting off one more. And I couldn't. Shit. Salvage mode, we gotta take it out, put on a new one, and patch everything up while the face mix is still malleable. How many tubes do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We need 13.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
We cut the sides for an easier fit. Put in our hole connector. Perfect. And that patching method that you saw me using just now is actually very similar to what we're gonna do next. So if you haven't put your gloves on yet, you should probably go get some. So it's time to mix our backer mix. I'm gonna mix up the whole 50-pound bag with 1 gallon of precast modifier and lay it on anywhere from 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch thick. Deciding when to apply the backer mix is actually critical. You don't wanna do this anywhere after 6 hours of your face coat being put down. Anything longer than 6 hours is gonna make sure that both of these mixes don't bond to each other properly. You also don't wanna put it on too wet because the backer mix is full of all these ugly fibers and it's not an aesthetic thing, it's just for strength. If it's still too wet, you risk the chance of it going past the decorative face coat and those fibers peeking through at the finished product. Generally, the best time to start mixing your backer mix is when you could touch the face and then no concrete is left on your surface, but the concrete is still a little bit malleable. Take our modifier, again, mix it up. It's easier to mix up the entire gallon with 1/2 of the gallon already out of the bucket, so that's what I'm gonna do. And again, same method, pour out 1/2 and then mix it all up. This is the consistency that I want. It's almost like if you were to put a bunch of hair into peanut butter. It needs to be malleable when you tap it, but it needs to be firm enough that it could withhold on vertical surfaces. So now the first thing I want to address is the corners, the walls. I'm just gonna pack them with the material and I'm gonna keep slapping it around like this for one important reason. Is that I want to minimize the amount of voids I have inside of there, and this basically acts like a vibration method for removing bubbles. Now I'm gonna go ahead and start doing the floor at about this thick all around. And now I'm going ahead and just smoothing out the bottom to make it a little bit more visually pleasing. Alright, so here we are about 12 hours after casting. We're ready to demold. Let's go ahead and do that now. Now I think it's time we flip it over and try to demold. Now it's just a matter of getting the foam insert out. And the easiest way is quartering it up into little tiny pieces. And if you want to recreate this table, this is the excess that I put away just so I can weigh a little bit later. And you see this weighs almost 25 pounds, almost half of the entire bag I wasted. That's what I get for basically eyeballing it, but if you're going to recreate, now you know you need a little bit over half of the bag of backer mix. Alright, so now that we've demolded, we have a few issues to address, mainly the overflow tube sticking out. We have a lot of bug holes in our surface, primarily by the corners where the corners meet. And then we have this plaster of Paris that's still stuck on there. Let's address the plaster of Paris first. I'm gonna go ahead and use a scraper to gently scrape most of this stuff off. Alright, now to wash off the rest of this, there's still a little bit on there that I'm not getting with the scraper. I'm going to wash it with something called SCR, which is a concrete degreaser. It's a light acid that does a couple of things. First, it washes everything off, make sure that everything is nice uniform color. And the second thing it does is it's going to open up the concrete's pores and make sure that, let's say there's a bug hole like this one, but it's covered by a very small amount of concrete, that's going to remove it and expose that bug hole so that I can come back and patch it later. The third thing it does is, again, it exposes those pores, and it's going to make sure that our stain grabs onto that concrete a lot better, and we're not going to have to use so much of it. So the SCR comes in 1 gallon containers, and it comes as a concentrate. You don't want to use this uncut. You want to use it with a cut percentage of water. So if you're using this on regular concrete, you do a 2-to-1 ratio. If you're doing it on overlays, a 4-to-1. But for XS and DFRC, we're gonna go with a 3-to-1 water to SCR ratio. So that's about 300 milliliters of water, and I'm gonna add 100 milliliters of the SCR. You see it turns that nice color. It's actually important that you add the SCR into your water instead of adding your water into your SCR if you're spraying out of a hose, because you have your SCR first and then you're trying to see how much water you're gonna add. You're spraying the hose and then the SCR starts bubbling and you're not gonna get a correct read. Before we actually start washing it though, we have a few things right here where there's a little bit of imperfections where the concrete kind of overlaps, so all we gotta do is cut that off, make it look as nice as possible, and then if we take off a little bit too much, we're gonna be able to patch that up later. So now that we have everything prepped for the SCR, we're gonna go ahead and wet the slab. You never wanna put SCR on a dry slab because it's gonna start working a little bit too effectively, and you're gonna notice that you may discolor it if you put it on dry concrete. You wanna keep it wet all the time. This applies also for when you're washing off the SCR. You don't want the SCR to dry off. You always want there to be wet spots all over your sink. And when you're done with the SCR, you want to make sure to rinse it off with water as soon as you can. So the next step is going to be using a product called Excess Slurry. It's a slurry mix that's designed to basically patch up any bug holes and any imperfections that you have. You don't want to mix a lot of it all at once. You want to mix up just enough for you to use so that it doesn't start setting up on you. So I'm going to mix it to about like a peanut butter consistency, and I'll show you how to use it from there. This is a good consistency that I like to work with. And the basic gist of it is, you go ahead, you put it on, and then you work it in with your thumb. And you want to get it on the entire surface just to make sure that you get a good color match between everything. There's not going to be any color differences between the places that were patched up with the slurry and the places that were fine. And now I'm gonna go ahead and hit it with a light sanding of 400 grit sandpaper. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pigment it, and how we're going to do that is by using EcoStain, which is a water-based stain. I like it a lot more than acid-based stains because if you do make a mistake or you don't like the way that something looks, it's very easy to go ahead and to touch that up with water before you seal it and lock it in place. The color I'm going to be using is Domino. It's a black pigment basically, and the website says that I need to dilute it 3 parts water to 1 part stain. That's exactly what I'm going to do. After I shook the bottle up, I'm going to add 100 to my 300 of water. I'm going to pour that into my pump sprayer and start spraying. Another difference about this stain, instead of acid-based stains, is acid-based stains will give you a completely uniform color instead of having it be a little bit varied, where it's a little bit darker here, a little bit lighter there. That's what that's what I want from my stain, and that's why I like using the water-based stains. It hasn't completely dried yet, but that's okay. I don't like the way that it looks. It's still way too dark. I should have diluted it less than what the manufacturer recommends. That doesn't matter because, again, this is the water-based stain, and I can go ahead and manipulate the way that it looks with a wet rag. And you don't want it to be too wet, you don't want it to be too dry, somewhere in between. And again, I want there to be a little bit of variation between the colors. I want it to be darker here, lighter there. And you have to keep in mind that we are going to be sealing this later. So the way that it looks when it's wet is exactly how the finished product is going to look. It's going to get lighter as it dries like it did over here, but this is the real color that we're going to see once the product's finished. So now I've waited exactly 7 days to make sure that the concrete fully cured, there's no retaining moisture trapped inside of here, and we gotta seal it. because first thing, we want to keep that stain from washing off with water, and we don't want this sink to get moldy. And because it's a sink, you need to do a few more precautions than, let's say, if this was just a countertop. I have to choose which finish I want, whether it's going to be satin, matte, gloss. I think I'm going to go with the matte finish. I want it to look like this rocky surface. And for that, I'm going to grab our food safe, water-based countertop sealer XS 327 matte finish. So to make sure that our top coat has a very deep and penetrating seal, we're going to mix up 3 coats: the primer coat, the first coat, and the top coat. With the primer coat, the first thing we want to do is mix up the actual product to get it catalyzed. The mix is 3 parts A to 2 parts B. So this is a water-based primer, which means that it's very thin and it's surprisingly nice smelling. I don't think that you're gonna have a problem doing this at home with all those like odors and really bad smells that most sealers have. So the next thing that we're gonna do is add 7 parts water to the total catalyzed mix. So I got 250 milliliters in here. I'm gonna add almost 2 liters of water into this mix. And the reason we're doing this, we're diluting it so heavy, is because we're gonna use a lot of it. We wanna get this as liquid as possible to penetrate as deep as possible into the sink. Sorry, I forgot to hit record, but I already started. Basically what you wanna do is you wanna get this mix very saturated into the pores, into the surface of your concrete, and you wanna use a lot of it. You wanna get this mix penetrated really deep, and I think I'm gonna switch from a roller to a brush because the brush is gonna be a little bit easier to use when getting into these like uncomfortable areas to work with. And again, don't worry about using too much with this primer mix. That's exactly what it's used for. Just make sure that when you're done with it, there's no puddling, right? Like no water droplets, no puddles. You want to make sure that it's going to be even on every single surface, evenly distributed. Now for the first actual coating, you have a different mix. You don't dilute it with so much water. We're gonna have a little bit less. This is the total catalyzed product of part A and part B mixed together, and we have to add 2 parts water to total catalyzed product for the first mix. So basically double the amount that we already have, or triple actually. It's been over 12 hours since I put on the primer coat, so that means I have to sand it. If I waited maybe, let's say like 6 or something like that, I'd be able to put on the second coat if it was dry to the touch. So I'm gonna hit it with some 220 grit sandpaper, make sure that we have a nice bond between those 2 layers and it doesn't flake off on me. And the last thing we have to do before mixing is we're gonna go ahead and wash off any of that dust created from the sanding with some denatured alcohol. And we can start, saturate the roller, and again, same thing. You wanna avoid puddling, pooling, but get it nice and coated. And then the next day you can do the same thing again, sand, clean, mix, apply, and then wait 24 hours for the sink to be ready for light use. And then for the final step, you can take one of these beauty inserts that we sell and place it in. It looks a lot nicer than that weird hole. Here's what the sink looks like at the finished product. I think it looks really cool, really modern. You can imagine this at a high-end nightclub or bar. So you've made it to the end of my video, but now I want to ask you for a quick favor. See, the YouTube algorithm gets tricked into showing my video to a lot more people if a lot of people comment on it. So criticize me, praise me, or just ask a question. As long as you leave a comment, I'm gonna appreciate it a lot. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.